Good Day, Bad Day, Teaching as a High Wire Act. This is a book presentation by Christina Oliveira for Dr. Olga Rowe for the summer of 2013 for Sociology 550, the Sociology of Education. Why I chose this book. I chose this book, Good Day, Bad Day, Teaching as a High Wire Act of 2006 by Dr. Ken Winograd because it is an autoethnography of a classroom teacher, or rather, a professor of education who returns to a primary school classroom to teach during a sabbatical, as he seeks to understand how his professional identity is a social construction that is at the nexus of multiple competing forces. I was expecting to find that Dr. Winograd's study could help me to conceptualize my own research project during the 2013-2014 academic year at a California community college. I had hoped that there would be enough overlap in the experiences of the teacher that could help me to clarify how I wanted to run my own ethnographic portion of the study, perhaps even help me to formulate questions that would help me to uncover how academic labor fits within a political economy. I cannot say that I particularly enjoyed reading the book, not because it was poorly written or heavily laden with jargon or even unrelatable to college teaching, but my lack of enjoyment stemmed from reliving the exhausting struggles of a first-year teacher vicariously through Dr. Winograd. His journal entries were filled with anxiety, fear, exhaustion, and self-doubt. So much of his writing during his time in the field was spent rehashing difficult moments in the classroom, trying to learn from them, extrapolating what might be possible to apply in the next academic or procedural lesson. Part of me did find enjoyment in observing the teacher-trainer struggle in the classroom, remembering what it was like for the experts in my credential courses to tell me what it would be like when I started teaching and how I could improve my techniques while I was clearing my credential. The main points of the book. First, beginning teachers must construct their own identity as professionals in negotiation with students, with faculty and school administration, and parents, while at the intersection of microstructural, individual personality, school structure, district structure, colleagues, students, and macrostructural dimensions, the culture of schooling, the economy, education policy, assessment requirements, sociocultural demographics, and so forth. Second, the power of the teacher is actually negotiated between the teacher, the students, the parents, and is contextualized within the institution and political and structural forces. The negotiated relationship of power is always tentative, and the subordinate has agency in the social reality. The goal of the negotiation is to come to a, quote, working consensus. Because the working conditions of the teacher are fluid, power must continually be renegotiated. Macrostructural forces exacerbate the already stressful negotiative classroom. Dr. Winograd suggests that teacher preparation must provide 3 important lessons for pre-service teachers. Here they are. First, pre-service teachers should learn that power within the classroom is negotiated so that they have the ability to recognize how power struggles within the classroom are natural occurrences that are inevitable and can be understood through larger frames. Second, flexibility is an important characteristic of successful teachers since the conditions for teaching are fluid. Third, important lesson for pre-service teachers, that pre-service and beginning teachers should learn about the history of class size and how it relates to learning and teaching. Dr. Winograd suggests that an understanding of the economic conditions that shape funding policy can enable teachers to critique their working conditions and to organize for smaller class sizes. The third main point of the book is that a lot of work performed by teachers is emotional work, and teachers actively shape their emotional responses to fit within acceptable forms of emotional displays. Emotions help teachers to locate problems in their own work that need correction, but it's also possible that dysfunctional emotions can lead to blame, like blame of the self, blame of the students, blaming the parents, other teachers, the school administrators, policymakers, the economy, society. Still, through a feminist lens, the author argues that public school is a gendered institution, and as such, empowering emotions such as anger are considered unacceptable teacher emotions because they inhibit teachers from genuinely empathizing with each other and recognizing the possibility of collective action to correct injustices at the local site and within larger institutions of schooling. So, even though anger is considered an undesirable emotion for teachers, anger is actually an empowering emotion that teachers should embrace. Okay, emotional labor. Emotional labor is the work of displaying emotion in order to affect the emotions of others. Teachers engage in emotional labor either through a form of self-programming, where the teacher trains herself to experience appropriate emotions for her job as a teacher, or through the construction of a teacher facade, where the teacher does not internalize appropriate emotional responses, what Winograd describes as, quote, deep acting. The surface acting can lead to feelings of alienation within the teacher. Dysfunctional emotional labor occurs when the teacher is unable to express genuine emotion because of structural restrictions or social identity. Dysfunctional emotional labor can lead to feelings of depression, despair, and alienation. After analyzing his journal, Dr. Winograd came to recognize 5, quote, feeling rules for himself as a teacher, and here they are. First, teachers have affection and even love of their students. So this is feeling rules. These aren't necessarily true, but these are rules that teachers have to internalize and follow. Second rule, teachers show enthusiasm for subject matter as well as for students. The third feeling rule for teachers is that teachers avoid overt displays of extreme emotions, especially anger and other dark emotions. They stay calm in order to avoid displays of joys or sadness. The fourth feeling rule that Winograd noticed from his notes is that teachers love their work. And the fifth rule is that teachers have a sense of humor and laugh at their own mistakes as well as the peccadillos of their students. So of course, these are rules that teachers have to follow, but they're not natural rules. Not every single teacher loves their work or loves everything about their work. And whenever a teacher complains about her work to somebody who is not a teacher themselves, a lot of times the listener grumbles, well, why don't you just leave teaching? And they think that the teacher is damaging their students. So it's if a person doesn't understand that teaching is not always a love fest, it can lead to a lot of misconstrued meanings between the teacher and the observer. Okay. And finally on this page, and I know I spent a long time, but teacher identity sits at the nexus of two axes. And let me get into this. Teacher identity is a negotiation of multiple and competing micro and macro political dimensions. Teacher preparation programs should shed light on the political dimensions of how teachers, students, formal education are all contextualized within those immediate and larger dimensions. In order to survive and thrive, teachers must learn for themselves that the role of the teacher is a construct between the individual and those larger forces. And the two axes that Winograd seems to argue are the internal-external line that intersects with the line of the ideal and with the real. So let me explain. Teacher identity is boundary work that is both political and personal. Survival as a beginning teacher requires that the teacher allows for her identity to be as flexible as conditions within the classroom fluctuate because of the personalities. The students have personalities, so do teachers. Changes in the conditions within which the local school and the administrators or faculty change, the influence of the state budget upon the school funding, those kind of things. And second, the construction of teacher identity follows a discursive process of reflection, of problem solving and practice. Through this process of constant improvement, the teacher's identity will continually change or evolve. The prerequisite for this discursive process is what Winograd calls a, quote, discourse of caring. In fact, one must first care about the students as individual people with struggles, dreams, and curiosities before teaching is able to even happen. Therefore, emotional labor creates a constant feedback loop in the process of teacher identity formation. Next, teachers rely on their emotional experiences within their families of origin in order to inform their practices in the classroom. So because teaching is incredibly immersive, the teacher's work life often conflicts with the obligations of home. And while teachers struggle with identity formation within a shifting context of micro and macro political dimensions, they must also manage their professional impressions upon others. There are a number of different reference groups that help the teacher to construct what is considered an appropriate professional identity, and the most important reference group is the students. At least this is true of Dr. Winograd. Teachers must mask their frustrations with the work, even though at times it is tedious and boring and especially stressful under the pressure to perform in state standardized exams that assess shallow student knowledge. Acceptability of the author's thesis. I agree with the arguments forwarded by Dr. Winograd, and I trust the honesty of his journal entries. Even though the author spent only 2.5 hours in the classroom every day for a year, and with a mixed-level elementary school, and had classroom assistants and a student teacher, his experiences of frustration, boredom, anger, confusion, delight, concern, and care were quite similar to what I experienced as a high school teacher and to a lesser degree as a college instructor. However, there is an obvious deficit in his project that could have deepened his understanding through a feminist lens, and that is the physical toll that is taken by full-time teaching. And now, I'd like to be frank, so please excuse how I'm going to communicate this next point. Because Dr. Winograd had the luxury of using the bathroom whenever he pleased, he did not have the genuine experience of being a full-time classroom teacher. If the author could have experienced the desperation of needing to use the restroom and not being able to do so, I believe that he would have better understood the physical sacrifices that the teacher must make as the caregiver and authority. Good Day, Bad Day needed an entire chapter devoted to the follies of the body, the humiliation of passing gas in a full enclosed classroom, and the desperation of needing to urinate and looking at the trash can in the corner of the room as a possibility at the end of the day or during a passing period. These things could have added a level of honesty and clarity for the pre-service teacher that no one wants to talk about. In our own staff lounge when I was teaching high school, a number of us women had conversations about the troubles with bladder infections because we just could not get to the bathroom on a regular basis for years. Okay, the second deficit that I find in the book is the relatively uncritical acceptance of recognizing students as psychological disorders. Beginning around mid-April of 1999, Dr. Winograd begins to diagnose students with common disorders: attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. Considering the amount of effort that Dr. Winograd needed to expend in order to gain control of the culture of the class, it seems to me that the medicalization of the students is a form of shorthand and fetishization, where the individual identity of the student is submerged out of sight in favor of interacting with students as medical labels with easy diagnoses that can be found in the DSM. Through the medicalization of the students, the researchers hides his own class position, and that's problematic in what Foucault called the clinical gaze. Here's an illustration. Let me see what page. Page 143. From pages 142 to 143, that is April 2, 1999, Dr. Winograd reflects, "The working consensus between the students and me has been effective, but fundamentally it has always been fragile. It is difficult for them to make the transition from friend to me. I imagine that Dorothy in the morning and Barbara have similar problems. Perhaps we have just too many adults working with this class, adults who all have slightly different rule systems and impersonal styles. I am beginning to use the vernacular of special education and naming my students, e.g., attention deficit disorder. This marks the beginning of my use of special education frame and will continue to the end of the school year." The themes of sociology. The themes of sociology which are covered in this book include: education is a social institution and it's connected with other social institutions, particularly the family. Second, education is a mechanism for perpetuating the existence of social stratification, particularly through gender and class. And third, education as teaching students to internalize cultural tools. Okay, so let me discuss the first two. Education is a social institution in connection with other social institutions, particularly the family, and stratification through gender and class, I think, can be well understood by examining a passage from Brent's text, Schools and Societies, the second edition. To summarize, he states that communities and families are mediators of class. Children of middle-class families experience less cultural conflict with the culture of school because the habitus of the teacher is similar to the habitus of the children. Conversely, children from working-class families experience differences in habitus and do not perform as well as their middle-class counterparts. So I have two passages to illustrate this point. The first, and this is for education is a social institution and its connection with other social institutions, particularly the family. So the two passages that I selected, the first comes from September 15, 1998. Dr. Winograd states in his evening journal entry, "I watched a 30-minute videotape on classroom management. Before the tape ended, I got tired, turned off the TV, and went upstairs. All the lights were out. Melinda went to bed. I climbed into bed around 11:15 and was unable to fall asleep. I thought about the next day for about an hour. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. thinking about what I needed to do." Okay, so education is a social institution that is connected with other social institutions, particularly the family. So in this first quote, we see that Dr. Winograd, even though he is only working for 2.5 hours in the classroom every day, that his work is interrupting the quality time that he would normally spend with his family. So in a way, or in a very real way, the family of the teacher is compromised by the work that must be performed by the teacher. Okay, the second section that I have is from November 4, 1998. He states, "Today I asked the students at the end of the day to draw or write about how they were feeling. Wanda sat looking forlorn. The kid's family is experiencing great economic stress. The mother is divorced with 3 kids, and she doesn't have much in the way of parenting skills. Wanda lives on junk food and television, and she is a victim at school. She has a really bad speech impediment. Her years of school speech therapy have done little good. 20% of the time she doesn't come to school." Okay, so what we see here is a conflict between the habitus of the teacher and the habitus of the student. Dr. Winograd is passing judgment, stating that Wanda's parents, or Wanda's mother, doesn't do a good job of parenting. And that's, Dr. Winograd doesn't have special insight into this family. Of course, he's making a value judgment based on what he can observe from the outside, but it is very possible that Wanda's mother is an amazing parent and is making so many more sacrifices than Dr. Winograd can perceive, or that he would ever have to make because of his cultural position. Okay, part 2. Education is a mechanism for perpetuating the existence of social stratification, particularly through gender and class. So we can see that the quote above from about Wanda and Wanda's mom could very well fit into this second bullet point as well. But I chose instead a passage from October 19, 1998, part of his reflection, to discuss social stratification through gender and class. On October 19, Dr. Winograd states in a reflection, "Then at least 2 ways I am different from my students. Age, all of them, and social class, most of them. There are Latino students in the class, and I have not really considered the language differences between them and me. I wonder how much my maleness also presents a cultural gap between the girls and me and our relations. I think this question warrants more study. The age difference and social class differences between my students and me are considerable problems for a teacher. I am able to relate to our middle class students and their parents with more ease than I am with working class kids. The middle class kids are more apt to acquiesce or conform to my agenda, while working class kids are more apt to challenge the legitimacy of my authority. The parents, who are like me, know what I mean when I cajole them to read to their kids. I am more effectively able to understand the needs of my kids who are middle class like me." The third theme that I found is that education is teaching students to internalize cultural tools. Again, I turn to Brent. Brent states that cultural conformity is the internalization of the cultural logic. Before the explicit curriculum can be taught, students must internalize and master cultural tools and social expectations. And we have a very clear illustration of this from Dr. Winograd's journal entries from the second semester, February 23, 1999. He states, "The good days have become more regular feature of my life now. I can think of 5 contributing factors." And then later he states, "I've gotten a handle on order." This is his second point. "My techniques aimed at eliciting students' attention and compliance are adequate. I use a timeout desk in the room for kids who need to be separated, and I allow them to come back to the group when they are ready to comply. For 3 or 4 of the kids who don't care about in the room timeouts, I use recess as the carrot. None of the kids except Anna likes to stay in during recess. Usually, When I keep kids in for recess, I sit with them individually and talk to them about their behavior, and we talk of ways they could, quote, make better decisions. Rarely do I have to keep a child in for the entire recess. Occasionally, I will use the school's timeout room as a management tool. So I'd like to go back to the very beginning of this passage. Dr. Winograd is talking about what makes a good day, and his second point, actually his first point and his second point, are both about classroom management. But I pulled the second point. He says, I've gotten a handle on order. My techniques aimed at eliciting students' attention and compliance are adequate. And then he goes on to explain what those techniques are. So what makes a good day is good social control. So before the students are able to learn anything from the explicit curriculum, they must internalize and perfect in performance the implied curriculum, which is discipline, order, passivity, and responsiveness to the authority. Do I like this book? Absolutely. I love this book. I think that Dr. Rowe, you should continue to recommend this book as part of the text for reading. I really wish that there would be another induction to the book to talk about Dr. Winograd's reflections after No Child Left Behind, and how the teaching and working conditions have changed since 2002. I'd also like more samples of his assessment data. Let me see what other things. Also, super important, the changes in working conditions, particularly after the financial crisis of 2007-2008. And I was wondering how teaching and working conditions have changed since that time. I believe that I will refer back to this text in order to mine for theorists for my own thesis project. I really think that you, Dr. Rowe, should continue to use this book for the Sociology of Education course, particularly for the journal entries, which are far more honest about the actual work of teaching than anything else I have ever read to date, which includes a master's degree in English composition theory and a professional clear teaching credential and a graduate certificate in cross-cultural language acquisition and development. So this is excellent text. The mind-numbingly boring and tedious and frustrating work of teaching is captured in Dr. Winograd's journal entries. I would like to know what pre-service teachers think of this text, whether they think they would fall into the depression as part of the job, if they would think that the lack of recognition for a job well done experienced by the author is unusual, which of course it is not. I remember that before I began teaching, I thought that I could teach anything to anyone and that everyone would automatically love me because I was so fun and charming and smart. Oh, I wish there was a way that the author could have captured how difficult it is to be young also as a teacher. To be a woman only a few years older than the students themselves, and the sexual politics that are a reality, and that must be negotiated between the teacher and the students, and between the faculty. Also, to be a young man who, under different circumstances, might have a sexual relationship with the girls in their late teens. It's really complicated. For teachers to begin teaching right after graduation, like I did, I began teaching at age 23, I believe. The sexual politics is really challenging. I felt like I had to be a pillar of society. I'm 22, 23 years old, and I have to go 200, 300 miles away in order to go to a club to relax. Or at least that's what I felt like I needed to do, and so did a number of my colleagues. So I wish that there was a way that we could get a little bit more about the personal life and how the teacher's personal life takes a toll, takes a toll as the teacher is immersed in the new profession. At any rate, there's so much more that is complicated than is represented by Dr. Winograd's experience. And much of that is minimized because he's a mature adult male who is married and is in a seemingly stable relationship. Did he ever have a big fight with his spouse? Did that affect what he did in the classroom? I don't know. So I would have liked to have had a little bit more than that. But I, generally speaking, think that this is a great book, and I'm looking forward to using it later. I've got lots of really great ideas for my own interviews. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I hope it wasn't too long. Thank you so much, Dr. Rowe, for introducing me to this text, and hopefully I can meet Dr. Winograd in the very near future as I am formulating my research design.